Let's look at a quick introduction to study lenses, what it is, and how you can use it. So the main purpose, as you're thinking, what is this, why is it different than something else, is it's designed for studying code, not explanations. So you're not going to be reading hundreds and hundreds of paragraphs and sentences describing how JavaScript works. Instead, you're just going to be studying code. You're going to be studying small programs written in JavaScript that are designed and written to help you focus on one specific feature of the language or one programming technique. But in order to make code more learnable, because it is famously confusing, Study Lenses is here to help you see the code in different ways. And each way that you can see the code will help you learn something different. So what does this mean? Here we have some code, and we want to see it differently. The first way to see it might be just to simply highlight it. Now we can draw circles on it. That's always fun. Or you can start to link different pieces of the code. So here the variables backwards is declared. It's red, assigned, red, red. This works really well, especially when you're studying in groups. Or if you're just studying it on your own, you can do little checks to keep track of what you've seen so far. So maybe we can clear the canvas. You might want to, for example, just count every time a variable is used. So all the lines that use the variable backwards, we can do a little red check. Every variable that uses, every line that uses the fixed, we can check, check, check. So just whatever it might be that helps you understand the code. Another lens that's helpful is variables. And this will help you look at how variables are used in the program. So when it appears in orange, it's been declared. When it appears in red, it has been red. The value has been red. When it's green, the value has been assigned. So you can hover over a variable to see how it's been used in the program. This can help you get used to the way that data is used in a program and figure out how the data is flowing through a particular program. There's more and more. Flowchart is a fun one. Just turns a code into a flowchart, which can help you think more about the dynamic behavior of the program instead of having to think of lines and lines and lines of code. And then there's this pseudocode lens, which will just take it and convert it into pseudocode. So it has the same logic as the original program, but less syntax. This is also a nice way for you and your classmates to have similar pseudocode, so when you're writing on a whiteboard or paper together, kind of understand what each other means. Same logic, different syntax. Another fun thing about lenses is you can compose them, which is just putting them one after the other. So first we'll take the code and we'll convert it into pseudocode, then we'll highlight the pseudocode. So now you can study pseudocode instead of the JavaScript. Or you could take the pseudocode and convert it into a Parsons problem. You can experiment with these later. Here you just have to click and drag the code to reconstruct the same program. Get feedback. All right. So that's the basic idea of what a lens is. It's just a different way of seeing the code. Different ways of seeing it will help you learn different aspects of the same code. A next way to think of a lens, now let's think more specifically about what is code and what is a program. We have two ways we can look at it. We can look at it dynamically, which is when you actually run the program and see the behavior of the program over time as it's evaluating. So what's changing in memory and what's the user's experience. And you also have static study. Static study are different ways that you can study the code without running the program. Let's take a look first at some dynamic lenses. The simplest would just be running the code. Here we read the instructions, we enter something, and it shows us what happened. We reverse the word. Not so interesting, but there's also some options to look more closely inside the program as it's evaluating. This is tiny, bear with me. You'll see later that usually you don't need to type in such a tiny screen. Oh, wrong. Okay. So we can open the program and run it in the debugger. This will help you get used to the professional developer tools in your browser and help you learn how values are changed over time inside of program's memory and how that's represented here, step by step going through the code. Don't need to do that right now. Another helpful lens for dynamic study is the trace lens. And what that will do, it will print to the console, line by line, what happened in the code and how you might read it out loud. So this is helping you learn to become the computer, and it's also helping you, when you're going to be working with your classmates, building a similar vocabulary for how you talk about the code executing. So on line 23, here, we declare the variable backwards using let, then we initialize it to null. Skip ahead, line 24. We're going to compare null to null, which evaluates to true. So here we have backwards, who's actually storing null equals null, true on it. So you'll get a chance to study this later. And there are more dynamic lenses, but that's enough to get the point across for now. Dynamic study is when you run the program and you see how it behaves, how values change in memory over time, and what a user might be experiencing. Then there's static study. These are the examples that we saw earlier. This is things like a flowchart. You're not running the code, but you're studying the instructions to imagine what you can learn about how it works or how the computer would read it. So let's look at one that we didn't see before. Let's look at the ask lens. This will simply ask you questions about the code. This is helpful if you're studying on your own or if you're studying in groups. You can configure what types of questions you want, and then you just click Ask Me, and it will make up a question. So how many times is the equal sign operator used in this program? And then you just have to go through and count. If we want, we can try to control F, but for now let's just do it by I. I see it only once. So these questions won't give you an answer, but they'll just prompt you to think about the code. And so the moment you think you get it, it's always a smart idea to go a little further and practice with the ask button to make sure you got everything you can out of a single program. Another example that we'll look at quickly is this blanks lens, to show that a lens might also be pretty complicated. So in this one, it'll take a program and it randomly removes things. And you can decide what you want to focus on. So maybe you want to study the operators in a program. The further you slide it to the right, the more they remove. More to the left, the less. And you have to try to remember what goes in that blank. If we do keywords, and we remove all of them, then you have to remember variable declarations will be let. And you can see that as you get the answer right, the red goes away. If you want a little extra help, you can show the diff. So lenses might also be more complicated. But either way, the basic data that you're going to be studying is a file of code, and you'll be studying it many different ways. So let's take a look at the study lens. This is the one that will be the home base for many of your exercises. It's a Monaco editor, so it's basically the same thing as what you have in Visual Studio Code. You can search and replace things in it. It has autocomplete in all the nice ways you've gotten used to. Console.log. It'll even start to tell you what arguments will go into a particular function. So the editor will be helpful. You can edit programs you're studying, you can save changes, you can print the program if you want, and you have all of the lenses and features that we saw before plus some. So here we can open the program in a new tab, or we can run it or trace it. Usually, the program will open with a certain selection of buttons, and these have been configured in a file called study.json. We can look at this in a minute later, and that will be in the folder with the files that you're studying. And this is written by someone who wrote the content, and they're thinking, what's the most helpful for you when you're studying this exercise? They'll make sure that only the helpful buttons appear and not the unhelpful ones. But if you like a button, or if you think some buttons are distracting, you have complete control from the UI to add or remove whatever features you like. You'll also see this a lot, the defaults option with 2 dashes instead of a lens. So what this is also saying is when you open this file, let's use whatever the author configured. So some folders, the default will be highlight. Some it might be study, some it might be blanks. And that's all depending on what's written in this file. But again, as a student, you'll have complete control over how you study the exercise. If you don't like the default lens, you can just write whichever one you want. URL parameters. So this is important because right now, as you've seen, it's working in this little page, which is convenient for small examples in a slideshow. But you want more than that when you're normally studying. You'll just want to focus on the code. So most of the time you'll be studying your exercises as a separate tab in the browser with just that file. So now to change a lens, instead of writing in a little box, you write it in the URL after this little question mark. And if there is no question mark, if there's nothing, you just get the code. If you want to, you can add any lenses. And if you want to compose a lens, you just need to use this @ symbol instead of a space. And you can switch the lens that way as well. And because you're just in a browser with a tab, you can go forwards and backwards to see what you've done before. So that's study lenses for a single file. So these have all been single files. But a lot of what you'll be doing is navigating through folders as well. And that's what this will look like. So this is also the main home base. We can step back. This is one of the modules. Here's all the folders and chapters and exercises for this module. You can open them and you can study a single file just by clicking on it. That's it.